People were evacuated and houses destroyed as fire swept in the coastal town of Lorne late this afternoon. The fire was burning on an 8-kilometre front in a northerly direction through the area and was later reported to be heading towards the township of Eastonview. A Red Cross unit has been set up at Eerie's Inlet to provide relief for evacuees. We'll have more details on all the fires later in this bulletin. Now here's where I'm going to have to ask, where do I go from here, please? Excuse me, one moment. These stories are coming through. Bushfire at Belgrave. Thank you very much. Must add that these stories are coming through on the spot. In Victoria, hundreds of firemen are fighting several major outbreaks throughout the state. So far, there have been no injuries, but hundreds of people have been evacuated and several houses destroyed. Major fires have erupted around Lorne, Woodend, and at Belgrave in the Dandenongs. At least 15 homes are known to have been destroyed at Belgrave. Malcolm Gray and Glenn Carley both cover the Belgrave fire, and Malcolm Gray begins this report.
Fire is travelling against the wind. It's coming up the hill from the Monbolt Creek. At the present moment, police have evacuated all homes east of Glenfern Road. 40 tankers and 150 firemen were rushed to the scene. Within 3 hours, the fire had burnt out more than 1,500 hectares and covered over 10 kilometres, fortunately in a southeasterly direction, away from the heavily populated suburbs of Upwey, Tacoma and Belgrave. Wellington Road was blocked off and the Princes Highway near Beaconsfield closed due to heavy smoke. Glenn Carley takes up the story.
At Belgrave South, where the fire is believed to have begun deliberately, some residents who have remained are trying desperately to save their homes, now with the help of CFA firemen. The blaze, which erupted in the intense heat, has come within metres of these homes. More than 15 homes have already been destroyed in the Mount Morton Road area, and as these houses went, many commuters were returning from their places of work. Many of them spoke of hearing details of the fire on their car radios. Firemen expect to be battling the blaze well into the night as strong southeasterly winds fan the flames. Officials expect a wind change about midnight.
In South Australia, 2 people are reported to have been killed in huge fires raging across much of the state. The government has declared a state of emergency and troops have been called in to help firefighters who are struggling to control some of the worst fires in Australian history.
3 people had perished. If the fire had come the previous month, in the holiday season, the deaths could have been in the hundreds. Houses along the coast, once a haven for holidaymakers, retired people, academics, honeymooners, artists, farmers and townspeople, looked as if a bomb had hit them. It might as well have. Such had been the ferocity of the firestorm that had come in the night. Over 700 houses had been destroyed along the coast. The worst hit areas were mere piles of ash when seen from the air, and not much more at ground level. The fire and the wind that went with it had torn places to pieces. Their interiors and contents were melted down and their bricks ripped open. Outside, paths were pushed away. Great blocks of stone shifted and huge trees torn asunder. The streets were littered with miles of lifeless power lines. The air was heavy with the rank smell of charred remains. The bush, once splendid, had been scorched so badly that what was left now seemed like the singed hide of an enormous ancient beast, with the black paralyzed trees as its hair. There was a silence which chilled the warm morning. Everything and everyone was in shock. Those who returned that morning moved slowly and spoke quietly, as if on a burial ground, which they were. As unpredictable as the fire's behavior was the way in which houses had survived. There had seemed to be no order to it. This house would go and that one, but not perhaps the one in between or across the street. Sometimes people whose houses had survived felt almost guilty about it, amid the suffering of friends and neighbors. The home of Dame Joan Hammond, the soprano who sang for the world from the 1940s until the mid-1960s, was left a melancholy wreck. Sighted back from the highway and with fine views of the sea from its wide windows and terraces, it had collapsed in great heaps of memories. Slowly, people straggled back to what had once meant something to them, their own place by the sea. They went through the ruins as softly as shadows, picking up things that had once been so familiar, looking at them and dropping them. They shook their heads in black wonder. They treaded through the remains of their dreams, as though they were in another dream. Houses had gone down in droves, 400 of them altogether in the district. Mount Macedon's pub survived. A church built in 1874 was gone. The fire had moved so fast that even the fastest animals couldn't get away from it. Altogether, 47 people died in Victoria and another 28 were lost in South Australia. It was one of the worst natural disasters in Australia's history of almost 200 years. Houses, farmland and stock losses were in the hundreds of millions of dollars. The stock losses were enormous, with over 300,000 sheep lost.
Well, today marks 40 years since the tragic Ash Wednesday bushfires tore through Victoria and South Australia, one of the nation's worst blazes to date. It will be an emotional day, remembering those we lost and reflecting on incredible stories of survival. Today's Isabella Stashkovsky met with firefighters from the front line who risked their lives for the community.
1 minute, it was just a tiny outbreak in a hill behind the town. The next, it was searing down, engulfing everything in its path.
So in this moment, you're actually underneath the truck with fire all around you?
Yeah. Just waiting for things to die down a little bit.
Don Garlick was just 19 years old on Ash Wednesday. He knew danger was ahead, but the gravity of it all wouldn't sink in till later.
When I left work, I could see the hills on fire, I could see the smoke kicking off, and so I drove to the Little fire station where I was the fire at that point, knowing that it was going to be a bad day.
More than 180 fires burned across Victoria and South Australia on February 16, 1983. 75 people lost their lives, including 16 volunteer firefighters.
There, only a few houses are left standing. Firemen fought for what they could, but by morning it was evident how hopeless the situation was.
The Dandenong Ranges among the worst hit in Victoria. Towns like Cockatoo almost wiped off the map. Destruction as far as Lorne. The Adelaide Hills, ground zero in SA. It was the first time a state of emergency was declared.
Everything was just on fire everywhere. It was just exploding everywhere.
A Lilydale member that day, Don was fighting fires and evacuating homes around Powelltown until they were surrounded.
It just started raining, fireballs, the wind just howling, just really pushing through the trees, sort of bending over. The driver and Captain Fred clearly realised we weren't going to make it into town, so they've just hoofed us across to the Forestry Commission. Got in under the truck with a couple of fog lines just to keep ourselves cool as the fire sort of raced around us.
There was nothing to do but wait under the truck. Don quickly took these photos.
As the night moved on, the real horror of the fire developed.
His team survived, but it wouldn't be till the next morning they would realise the extent of the devastation.
Now the radio was starting to report deaths around some places.
Today, like many, Don is thinking of the communities impacted, the firefighters who lost their lives.